I love it.
I know my sweat stains are so terrible. I'm really sorry, guys.
Hello, I'm Shayna, and I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I wanted to kind of just put my story out there about how I was diagnosed, and all the symptoms that came with it, and just how the diagnosis went in general. So I think that this video hopefully will appeal to diabetics and non-diabetics. If you clicked on this video, maybe you are a diabetic or you love someone who's a diabetic and you want to kind of get to understand more about what it means to be a diabetic. How many times have I said diabetic in this video already? A lot. Okay, so I'll just jump into the story. So basically, I was 11 years old when I was diagnosed, and I was really sick for a really long time, as most people are before they're diagnosed. But I was in denial, and a really weird thing is that I was 11 years old, and I think I was probably about 4'11" at that point, which I think is standard, but I lost weight really quickly. All my symptoms kind of started out before the weight loss, but the weight loss was really noticeable. So I think I was around 100 pounds before I really started experiencing symptoms of diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA, my bad. And basically I was around 100 pounds before I started experiencing these symptoms, and when I weighed in at the hospital when I was diagnosed, I was 68 pounds. So I lost over 30 pounds in probably a month to 2 month period. And what I want to say is, one thing that's very sad was, like, my parents were obviously noticing my weight loss. Everyone was, but I was enjoying the way I looked. And this is really sad. I was 11 years old and I already was always thinking about being skinny all the time. And I started getting comments from my mom mainly, because she and I would go shopping a lot, and she would say, you know, like, you are so skinny. And I've always been a very, very average weight kid, and I'm a very average weight adult now. You know, on the athletic side of builds, I guess, I'm pretty curvy now, but I've always been a very normal, average sized kid. Like, even when I was born, I was very normal. Like, I was 7.5 pounds, I think. Really average. So when I started losing this weight, it was really noticeable. I looked skinny. I looked really skinny. And so it made me feel very bad about myself, though, when my parents would make these comments, because I didn't know what was going on. And at 11 years old, you are so vulnerable to lots of different things, lots of comments. It's a freaky time to be alive, right? So this was the summer going into 6th grade, which was the transition year from elementary school to middle school at the time. Some schools do it a little different. Some schools, 6th grade is elementary school. My school, I was going into middle school when this was all happening. And I just remember, like, every single textbook symptom of type 1 diabetes I experienced. And it's so weird that these symptoms, I noticed them, but they didn't mean anything to me. So if you don't know what those symptoms look like, dehydration or, like, extreme thirst is a big one. So I remember at the time we weren't the most eco-friendly household, and we had plastic water bottles in the house. And I remember going through like 6 or 7 in a day. And like, I was a pretty small kid, so like, that's a lot of water. And with that came frequent urination. So I remember that I would wake up 2 or 3 times during the night to go pee. And I thought it was weird, but it's like one of those things you just like kind of, when your body tells you like, go pee, you just go pee. It's not like, oh my gosh, why do I need to go pee right now, even though I peed a little bit ago. Or maybe you do have that kind of self-awareness now, but at 11 years old, I didn't have that self-awareness. So anyways, I was super thirsty, peeing all the time. My parents always talk about, they love this one story about how we went to a Mexican restaurant, and I still am. I love lemonade. But I remember, or they always tell this story about how I asked for my glass to be refilled 6 times. 6 times over the course of like a 1-hour dinner. And I was just so thirsty. I was drinking like crazy. So another thing, obviously I had lost that weight. But with that comes also just like this tiredness, fatigue, and that is what I experienced. So I was a big tennis player, and that was right at the beginning of me starting to play semi-competitively. I was on varsity in high school. Really cool. But yeah, anyways, so I was playing tennis, and I definitely noticed that my stamina and just my endurance was way down. Like, it was very confusing because this was a time when I was supposed to be like growing and gaining muscle and getting bigger and becoming an adult more, transition, puberty, things like that. But I remember I had my first ever competition, and I just got slammed. Like, it was very upsetting, and like, I didn't have reference at that point for what was happening with my body, but that was the day before I was diagnosed. So all these things were culminating. It was very strange. I didn't understand what was really going on. I remember, so this is also a big one that I don't hear people talk a lot about, but a huge thing for me was that year. So for months before I was actually diagnosed, I was having a lot of like focus and memory problems. And it makes complete sense looking back on it now, but basically, like, I remember I took some standardized tests, and I was always really, really good at standardized testing, and I just did not do well. And like, genuinely, I remember just having some focus and memory problems, just like in math class, which is my weakest subject for sure. Just like, it wasn't connecting at all. And like, part of that's me, sister, but like another part of that is just my brain was not getting the nutrients, was not, my body was slowly reducing the insulin production level down to a crawl. So yeah. And I remember another thing, this is kind of embarrassing, but looking back on it, I was able to really connect the dots. But I remember really having like I wouldn't, one thing you see described a lot in people who are experiencing diabetic ketoacidosis is they describe a fruity smelling breath. I didn't really experience like the fruity, but definitely my mouth was dry all the time, and I had bad breath. Like, I knew it was something I knew about myself. And now I don't at all. So I definitely think it has to do with, high blood sugars, uncontrolled, undiagnosed type 1 diabetes. So let's Oh, that's embarrassing, bro. Sorry, the boyfriend cold. Oh my god. Okay, I need to not do that at all. Anyways, so now focusing in on the diagnosis itself. Basically, I didn't think anything was wrong with me. I was really resistant to the idea of going to the doctors. And I just I didn't really understand what was happening at all. But my sister and I had a trip planned for the summer to go visit our aunt in New Mexico. And so my mom said, like, just before you go, like, this was the day before we were supposed to go. She's like, just before you go, like, let's go to the doctor and just kind of like see what's going on and like make sure that it isn't diabetes, basically. My mom, a little bit of backstory, my mom's brother, older brother, was a type 1 diabetic, and at this point, he had died a couple years prior from complications with his diabetes. And yeah, my mom had seen him struggle with his diabetes management all throughout his life. And that ultimately made my diagnosis and just like me living with this disease now, even, 11 years later, it's made it really difficult for my mom because she watched her brother die a very slow and painful death because he did not manage his diabetes properly. And he was, I think, like 55 when he passed away. He passed away from a stroke. So that's a little bit of a backstory. And it sucks I never got to know him when I was a diabetic, because I think that would have been really, something special kind of to share with him. But either way, so my mom was kind of aware of the symptoms of type 1 diabetes. And I'm sure she had looked it up as well at this point. My mom and my dad probably had looked it up. Anyways, so we just went into our local doctor's office. It wasn't like we went into the hospital or anything like that. Ooh. Me just like flexing on cam. Anyways, so we didn't go into the hospital at first. We went into the regular doctor's office. And basically, if you don't know, the way that you're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes is really simple for the most part. They test your blood sugar. It's a single finger prick, like a million and maybe even more than a million I've done by now. Basically, I think my blood sugar was like 490, 530, something, somewhere in the upper 400s, 500s range, which is, 4 or 5 times higher than a person who does produce insulin would have. And like, it was so strange because diabetes is such a huge diagnosis. But the test is so simple. They test your blood sugar, and right there, they will tell you, yes, you have type 1 diabetes. And I remember the confusion of just being like, what? Like, how are you going to tell me that after a second? And like, I started kind of arguing. I was like, no, like, I just ate. How could that not have an effect on anything? Blah, blah, blah. And my mom was really calm. And I remember walking out of that doctor's office and just being like mind fucked. I was confused. And like, my mom and I, like, my mom didn't say anything. We got in the car and she drove to a gas station, and I remember, like, she got out of the car to put gas in, and I just started sobbing. I was freaking scared. I was very scared. Oh, one symptom I didn't mention was I remember a few times being really hungry, like really interested in food, and like craving some weird things. And then when I would get the food, it would make me nauseous, and it would make me a couple times I did throw up after eating a whole bunch of food. Yeah, so that's a little another thing that happened. But yeah, either way, so I was crying at this point. I think my mom must have called my dad and my sister. New Mexico's off, like it's done. Shayna needs to be hospitalized. Yeah, so they took me in, and basically I was admitted as an inpatient, and they went through all of the normal stuff that they do, you know, when someone is diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. They start giving you insulin and things like that. And like one thing, I don't know if it's unique to my story, so please tell me if you relate to this at all, but my parents have never given me an injection. Never. I was 11 years old when I was diagnosed. I've said it a lot now. And I was very independent. I didn't want my parents to give me any insulin. I didn't, and this continued on, you know, forever, I guess. I really didn't want them to be involved in my disease. And it's caused issues in a lot of ways, but I really rejected that notion of it being like a family disease. They'll say that all the time, and I was so against that, and I kind of still am, because like it's kind of BS, right? Like for me at least. I think if you have a baby diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, that's different, I'm sure. But like for me, it was my burden. Obviously my parents had their own struggle with it, but their issue wasn't the disease. Their issue was like my health and safety. My issue is this disease. Like I carry it on my shoulders, you know? And so anyways, they never gave me an injection. When I was diagnosed, we were still using syringes and like the little vials. So you had to, you know, flick the air bubbles out and all that. I had 1,000,000,001 syringes all over my house. I kind of still do. I don't know why. I haven't used a syringe in a long time. But yeah, so I remember when I first got taken into the hospital, they gave me a saline drip. And a couple years later, when I had a DKA episode, I remember experiencing the same kind of thing. But I remember like when the saline drip goes in, you're just so dehydrated and just shriveled almost into nothing. Like your organs start to shut down when you're experiencing diabetic ketoacidosis. So when you get that saline drip, ooh, the flavor, it is so good, dude. Like, not the flavor isn't good, but the feeling of like relief of your body getting hydration that it desperately needs. Chef's kiss. That's the good shit. Anyways, so once I was admitted, it was kind of a weird thing. I never really let myself be very upset about it, just because that's how my personality is, I guess. I always want to appear strong, and I always want to take things head on. It's the Aries in me. But I remember one of the hardest things at this time was texting my friends, and like I said, we were all transitioning into middle school, and I had a small group of friends, and I remember telling them about my diagnosis, and mind you, these are 11-year-olds. but, you know, they weren't there for me, to tell you the truth. These were girls I was really close with, but, and I don't think it was because, you know, they had a preconceived notion about diabetes necessarily, but for whatever reason, they never visited me in the hospital. I was there for 13 or 14 days, which is a long time to be in a hospital, especially over summer break, like when you're a kid. But I had one friend who was outside of this friend group, and she was a little bit, you know, a little bit quirkier, a little bit like on just like the outside, the fringes more of like any sort of elementary school social group. And her name was Sydney. Shout out Sydney. Nicest girl ever. And she visited me a few times, her and her dad, and I just remember like I was so vulnerable in that time. And obviously my family is amazing. They were there for me the whole time. My mom was there the entire time, like around the clock, right? But having visitors who didn't have to be there, so Sydney visited me, and then my mom's best friend, we call her my fake Aunt Donna, she visited me, and that was the kind of thing that this event, the event of my diagnosis, it really changed me. And like, I would love to know if anyone else has a more dramatic story or like a less dramatic story, or please just share your diagnosis stories below if you're interested in doing that or you feel comfortable doing that. But I just was never the same after that. You know, you value the people that show up, right? And I think even at 11, that was really clear to me, is like, there are people in your life who will show up for you when you need them. And like, not to like a birthday party or, you know, maybe that, but like, people show up when you're important to them. And that is one thing this disease has really taught me. People who care will ask you questions and find out what it means to be a diabetic, because ultimately it's something that I have, you know, diabetics have to deal with every day. We don't get to forget that we're diabetics. And I just wanted to share this story because I haven't seen other people talk about their diagnosis on YouTube, and I think that I would love to make this a series where I talk about it more. I did go into a diabetic coma a couple of years after my diagnosis, and that's a pretty dramatic story in some ways, but not a unique one. And you know, I have other diabetes related stories that I would love to tell, and I really would love to just like start a dialogue, hear from other diabetics. A diabetic log. No, it's a no. But anyways, I think I've been thinking a lot more about my health lately, and I think we all probably have, as a result of COVID-19, coronavirus. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to be a chronically ill individual, and obviously there are lots of other chronic illnesses besides diabetes. This is just the one I'm familiar with, and it's really led me to reflect a lot about the people in my life, and if they care about my health and safety, and if they recognize how serious it is to have diabetes. And like, you know, while it's not the most defining thing about me necessarily, it is a defining thing about me. And I think that's okay. So, like I said, share below your diagnosis stories. You can ask me questions. I'll answer them to the best of my ability. But besides that, thanks for joining me.